Hey everyone, this is Heidi from the blog Hands Occupied with a knitting tutorial for you today. In this video, I'm going to walk you through that moment of panic when you realize you've dropped a stitch in your knitting. So that's when you have been knitting along, and all of a sudden you realize there aren't the right amount of stitches on your needle anymore. Or you look down and you see something like what's on my swatch here. You've got this rogue loop of knitting that's not attached to anything, and it's at risk of pulling out the entire row and wrecking your entire project. So, all that to say, this is an important skill to have in your knitting arsenal. On my needle here, I have just a few stitches knit in mostly stockinette stitch, so knit one row, purl one row when you're working flat. And as you can see here, I've got one of those rogue loops or a dropped stitch a couple rows back, and I'm going to walk you through how to fix it. So what we're going to do is work our row, so knit our row, because we're on the right side, knit our row like normal until we reach the problem zone. So the problem zone here means that it's right in the middle, so we're looking directly vertical from our drop stitch all the way up to our needles. So you can see here what that looks like. So what we want to do is get that stitch knit after the fact so that it's no longer dropped. One way you can do this, and for years as a beginning knitter, I would just tear back my work to the drop stitch and just re-knit it and fix it. But if you're working with a larger scale project, fixing a mistake like this, being able to do that in the way I'm about to show you becomes really good, especially if you deal with hand pain or if you're just really impatient and don't want to redo all that work you already did. So one thing you can do is use a crochet hook to get this loop back in line. I like to use a knitting needle though, just because it's right in front of me already and it's really convenient. So what you need to do is be really careful to not twist your stitches as you work. So what we're going to do is put that rogue loop on our left-hand knitting needle like so. Don't pull on it because that'll create a pulled stitch, tightening the stitches around it and affecting your project's gauge. So we're going to just carefully thread that loop through our left-hand needle. Now if your rogue drop stitch is further down, it's not possible to use your needles to do this, and in that case you'll want to use a crochet hook, and in just a minute I'll show you how to do that as well. But for now we've got that loop on our left-hand needle, and you want to take a look at the loops that are on your needle that are not drop stitch loops, so that you know which way to angle the loop on the left-hand needle. So what you're going to do is have the stitch laying at a diagonal from your bottom right to the upper left. So you want it to angle like this across the needle. If it's angled the other way, you'll result in twisted stitches, which is not what you want in a sea of stockinette stitch like this. So what you're going to do when you have your loop properly oriented is put your right hand needle through it and look for this ladder of yarn right above that drop stitch. So what you need to do is take your knitting needle, grab the bottom rung, so to speak, of the ladder with your right hand needle, bring it through just like you're knitting normally to fix that stitch. And you'll know your stitch isn't twisted when you look at it and it's open at the bottom instead of twisted around itself like a braid at the bottom. Then you're going to put that loop one more time, because we pulled back 2 rows. You're going to put it diagonally in the appropriate way across your left hand needle. Put your right hand needle in there. Grab the next rung of the ladder and bring it through, fixing your dropped stitch. We'll put this back on the left-hand needle and we're ready to continue knitting our row with our fixed drop stitch. So let me show you at the end of the row what this looks like. So right here, you can see that all those loops are in line instead of like our swatch where we've got that rogue loop. Everything is nice and in line like it should be. A couple things to look at though here are, you'll notice that your loops are a little bit tighter where we fixed that drop stitch. That is going to happen because you didn't work the stitch, so there's not quite as much yarn to work with to fix those loops. This still works, and oftentimes blocking can fix some of this tension issue, but if you're working on a project where gauge is critical, or you've dropped a stitch really far back, you might want to actually tear back your work and manually re-knit those rows. Just a tip, if you're more of a beginner knitter, you can totally get away with fixing stitches this way, but if it's a very advanced project, and especially if it's a fitted garment where gauge matters a lot, just keep that in mind when you're fixing a drop stitch. Now I'm going to walk you through how to do this with a crochet hook. So let's say you want to use a crochet hook to fix your dropped stitch in your knitting. This is great, once again, for if your drop stitch is really far down or if you just don't want to juggle needles quite so much. So what we're going to do is take a look at our knitting right here where we've got our drop stitch hanging out a couple rows back, and we have the ladders of yarn in between the non-drop stitches. So what we're going to do is work our knitting like normal, so knit to the point in the row where the drop stitch is. And I've got just a few stitches here, so that took no time. And we're going to lay down our work in front of us to take a look at this. What we are going to do with the crochet hook is catch that rogue loop, making sure it's not twisted. So right now, if we take a look at the loop, you can see it's open at the bottom right here, and so you can put your crochet hook right through that and easily fix this drop stitch. The nice thing about the crochet hook method is that you don't have to worry as much about the angle of the loops in your work. So what you do is look for the first ladder, so these horizontal bars of yarn, the first ladder above your rogue loop. You're going to take your crochet hook and hook that loop and pull it through the other loop. Then you're going to do that one more time, finding that next ladder, hook it and bring it through. Then all you've got to do is place that loop on your left-hand needle and continue on in your work. And much like with using just your knitting needles and not a crochet hook, tension is the same issue here. So please don't forget that if gauge really matters in your knitting, this might not be the best way to fix drop stitches. Tearing back might be the best route for you. So no matter which method you use, whether you use your knitting needles or a crochet hook to fix your drop stitch in knitting, both work really well, but make sure to keep an eye on your tension. If you have tips and tricks for how to fix drop stitches in knitting, let us know in the comments, and also reach out there if you have any questions. Don't forget to tune in again soon for more knitting tutorials.